The low hum of the ITV studios was a familiar comfort, a soundscape of controlled chaos that preceded every live broadcast. Backstage in the green room, Sir Cliff Richard at 73 looked as composed as he had for the past 5 decades. He straightened the lapels of his tailored jacket, sharing a light-hearted joke with his publicist. He was scheduled to appear on Loose Women, a routine stop on the promotional tour for his upcoming Still Reelin' and A-Rockin' tour. It was meant to be a friendly chat, a nostalgic look back, a cheerful plug for the new dates. What he was about to walk into, however, was a meticulously prepared ambush that would become one of the most talked-about moments in British daytime television. As he was led through the labyrinthine corridors towards the set, the pre-show buzz intensified. He could hear the warm-up act finishing their routine and the studio audience's enthusiastic applause. A production assistant, barely out of her teens, handed him a lukewarm mug of tea. "They're ready for you, Sir Cliff," she said, her smile genuine. He returned it with his trademark warmth, a smile that had sold millions of records and charmed generations. He stepped onto the brightly lit set to a wave of applause. The 4 women on the panel greeted him, but as he settled into the plush guest chair, he noticed something was off. The usual effusive energy was slightly muted. Denise Welch, seated in the lead presenter's chair, offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Flanking her were Nadia Sawalha, who gave him a reassuring nod, Linda Robson, who beamed with genuine affection, and Kay Adams, whose expression was professionally neutral. The atmosphere, which should have been celebratory, felt brittle, like glass on the verge of cracking. "So, Cliff," Denise began, her voice a little too sharp, cutting through the fading applause. The floor manager's countdown had barely finished in their earpieces. "Here you are again. Another tour. Still performing at your age?" She paused, letting the phrase hang in the air. "Don't you ever think it's time to just hang up the microphone? Let someone younger have a go?" The question landed with a thud in the cheerful studio. The audience shifted, a collective, uncomfortable murmur rippling through the seats. It was a jarringly aggressive opening. Cliff's smile flickered for a nanosecond, the only sign of his surprise, before his decades of media training kicked in. He gave a gentle laugh. "Well, Denise, that's one way to start," he replied, his tone smooth as silk. "I suppose, as long as the fans want to come and hear me sing and I'm still physically able to do it, then age is just a number, isn't it? Music doesn't really have an expiry date." Nadia Sawalha, sensing the immediate tension, jumped in. She looked visibly uneasy, glancing from Denise to Cliff. "I think what's absolutely amazing, Cliff, is how you've maintained not just your voice, but your passion for performing after all these years. It's truly inspiring," she said, deliberately trying to steer the conversation back to safer, more positive ground. But Denise was having none of it. She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, her expression hardening into a cynical mask. "That's all very romantic, Nadia, but let's be honest here, shall we? Cliff, your last few albums have been commercial disasters. The charts today are dominated by artists who weren't even born when Summer Holiday came out. Isn't this tour just about ego at this point? A refusal to accept that the world has moved on?" The studio fell into a stunned silence. Even the camera operators seemed to hesitate. Linda Robson's mouth had fallen slightly agape, a look of pure shock on her face. Kay Adams shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting towards the producers behind the camera, a silent question in her eyes. Cliff straightened in his chair, his posture becoming more formal. "I'm sorry, Denise, but I'm afraid I have to disagree with you there," he said, his voice polite but firm. "My fans, many of whom have supported me for over 50 years, still come to my concerts in their thousands. They still buy my music. I'm not entirely sure what commercial disasters you're referring to. My last Christmas album went gold." "Oh, come on," Denise shot back, her voice rising with derision. "A Christmas album? That's practically a novelty record. Your last proper studio album barely cracked the top 50. You're living in the past, Cliff, clinging to glory days that, if we're being brutally honest, weren't all that glorious to begin with. It was just simple pop for simple people." The audience gasped audibly this time. The insult wasn't just to him, but to them, to their memories. Cliff's face flushed slightly, a hint of color rising on his cheeks, but his voice remained astonishingly controlled. "Denise, I was invited here today to talk about my upcoming tour and to connect with the viewers who have been so incredibly supportive over the years. I'm not quite sure why you've chosen to attack me personally rather than have a proper conversation." "Attack you?" Denise laughed, a short, humorless bark. "I'm just asking the questions that everyone's thinking but is too polite to say. When you look in the mirror, do you really see a relevant artist, or do you see an old man desperately trying to recapture something that's long, long gone?" Nadia Sawalha could not stay silent any longer. Her face was a mask of dismay. "Denise, I think you are being incredibly unfair and frankly quite cruel. Sir Cliff is a legend who has brought joy to millions of people across multiple generations. He deserves our respect. Oh, please, Nadia, spare me the hagiography, Denise snapped, turning her venom on her colleague. Just because someone's old doesn't automatically make them a legend. Half the people watching this show probably don't even know who he is, apart from that one song they play at Christmas. Cliff's composure was beginning to show fine cracks. It wasn't anger that was breaking through, but a profound sense of disbelief at the sheer unprofessionalism of the situation. I have to say, he began, his voice a little strained, in all my years of television appearances, from the BBC in the 50s to today, I have never been spoken to with such hostility. I'm not sure what I've done to warrant this. Hostility. Denise's voice was getting louder, more theatrical. This is called honest journalism, Cliff. Maybe you're just not used to it because for 60 years, everyone has fawned all over you and telling you how wonderful you are. Linda Robson finally found her voice, her tone pleading. Denise, please, let's just move on and talk about the tour dates. Our viewers would love to hear about where you're playing, Cliff. But Denise was on a roll, seemingly energized by Cliff's visible discomfort and the rising tension in the studio. You know what really bothers me about performers from your era? You take up all the space that could go to new, exciting talent. You've had your time in the sun. Why can't you just gracefully exit and let some fresh voices be heard? The words hung in the air like a toxic fog. Cliff sat back in his chair, the color draining from his face. The man who had faced down music critics for half a century, who had navigated the shifting tides of pop culture with unwavering grace, looked genuinely wounded. I think, Cliff said, his voice now quiet, almost a whisper, that every artist deserves to be treated with a measure of basic respect, regardless of their age or their position in the charts. I've never once tried to block anyone's path or take opportunities away from younger artists. There's room for everyone. Kay Adams, looking mortified, finally spoke up, her voice tight with embarrassment. Sir Cliff, perhaps we could talk about your extensive charitable work instead. You've raised millions for various causes over the years, which is truly commendable. Oh yes, the charity angle, Denise sneered before Cliff could even respond. Her timing was vicious. Another clever way to stay relevant, isn't it? Nothing like a bit of public generosity to keep your name in the papers when the music isn't doing it for you anymore. That was the moment the dam broke. The studio audience erupted. What had been uncomfortable murmurs exploded into a chorus of audible gasps and shocked exclamations. A man in the back row stood up and shouted, "That's disgusting!" His voice echoed in the sudden charged silence that followed. Denise's attack on his philanthropy was a line too far. Cliff's face went from pale to a deep flushed red. For the first time in the entire excruciating interview, his famous composure completely shattered. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of the chair, his voice shaking with a mixture of raw hurt and righteous disbelief. My charitable work? Are you seriously suggesting that my work with children's hospitals, with health charities, is nothing more than a publicity stunt? Do you have any idea how profoundly offensive that is? Nadia Sawalha looked utterly horrified. She turned to Denise, her eyes blazing with fury. Denise, you have gone way, way too far. That is a vile accusation. Sir Cliff has genuinely helped countless people. How dare you question his motives for giving back to the community? I'll question whatever I like, Denise shot back. Her face contorted in an ugly sneer, though a flicker of panic was now visible in her eyes as she registered the audience's hostility. This is my show, and if Sir Cliff can't handle a few hard questions, maybe he shouldn't be here. Hard questions. Linda Robson's voice was rising, her usual calm demeanor completely gone. These aren't hard questions, Denise. This is a cruel personal attack. You're being absolutely vile to a guest who came here in good faith to have a nice chat. Denise whipped her head around to face Linda, her eyes blazing with fury. Don't you dare tell me how to do my job, Linda. I'm not here to stroke egos and throw softball questions at has-beens. The word has-been hit Cliff like a physical blow. He visibly recoiled in his chair, his mouth opening slightly in shock. For a moment, he seemed utterly speechless. It was then that Kay Adams stood up from her chair, a dramatic breach of protocol for a live broadcast. Her voice, when she spoke, was trembling with controlled anger. Denise, I cannot and will not sit here and be a party to you humiliating a guest in this manner. Sir Cliff, on behalf of the show and this network, I am deeply, profoundly sorry for this treatment. Sit down, Kay, Denise commanded, her voice turning to ice. Don't you dare apologize for me doing what real journalists are supposed to do. Real journalists? Cliff finally found his voice again, and for the first time, it contained a core of steel. Real journalists ask probing, intelligent questions. Denise, yes. But they don't engage in personal character assassination. They don't mock a person's charity work. They don't try to strip someone of their dignity for cheap entertainment. The audience began to applaud. It started with a few scattered claps, but quickly swelled into a wave of supportive applause, a clear verdict on the confrontation. The sound seemed to infuriate Denise even more, her face reddening with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "Oh, so now you're playing the victim," she sneered, raising her voice to be heard over the clapping. The great Sir Cliff Richard, reduced to playing for sympathy from a daytime television audience. How the mighty have fallen. That was the final straw. With a quiet, resolute dignity, Cliff stood up. The 73-year-old legend rose from his chair, his face set in an expression of profound disappointment that was more damning than any outburst of anger could ever be. The studio fell completely silent. The applause died away, replaced by a tense, expectant hush. Even the cameramen seemed to hold their breath. "I have been in this business for over 50 years, Cliff said, his voice steady now, but laced with emotion. "I have been interviewed by some of the toughest, most respected journalists in the world. I've faced difficult and intrusive questions about my career, my personal life, my faith, everything you can imagine. But I have never, ever, in all that time, been treated with such unprofessional, unprompted cruelty as I have been today on your show." Denise opened her mouth to interrupt, a last-ditch effort to regain control, but Cliff held up a single commanding hand. "I am not finished," he continued, his voice growing stronger, resonating through the silent studio. "You have questioned my relevance. You have mocked my age. You have dismissed my music. And worst of all, you have insinuated that my work for those in need, the most important work I do, is nothing more than a cynical ploy for publicity. You have shown complete and utter contempt, not just for me, but for the millions of fans who have so generously supported me throughout my career." The other panelists sat transfixed, frozen in a tableau of shock and shame. Nadia had tears welling in her eyes. Linda was nodding vigorously in agreement with every word Cliff spoke. Gay remained standing, her arms crossed, a silent sentinel of defiance against Denise's earlier command. "I came here today to share my joy about getting back on stage," Cliff went on, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I came here to talk about a tour that thousands of people have already bought tickets for and are excited about. I came here to connect with your viewers, who might enjoy hearing a few stories from my long career. Instead, I find myself in the bizarre position of having to defend not just my music, but my very right to exist as an artist at my age. Are you quite finished with your sanctimonious little speech?" Denise spat, but her voice had lost its earlier conviction. The unified rebellion from her colleagues in the audience had clearly rattled her. Cliff looked directly into her eyes, and his expression softened into something that looked remarkably like pity. "You know what saddens me the most about all this, Denise? It's not the personal attacks. Believe me, I've developed a thick skin over the last 60 years, and I've survived much worse than anything you could possibly throw at me. What truly saddens me is that somewhere out there, a young, aspiring artist might be watching this broadcast, and they might think that this is how people in our industry are supposed to treat each other. They might think that this kind of casual cruelty is acceptable or even admirable. And that I find truly heartbreaking." The audience erupted in applause again, louder and more sustained than before. Several people were now on their feet cheering for him. In the control room, frantic producers were screaming into their headsets, trying to decide whether to cut to an early commercial break and pull the plug on the unfolding disaster. Denise's face was a blotchy red, her composure crumbling under the weight of the room's disapproval. "Well," she stammered, a desperate final attempt at a parting shot. "If you're so upset about being challenged, maybe you should just stick to playing for your little fan clubs, where everyone can tell you how wonderful you are." "There it is again," Cliff said sadly, shaking his head. "The contempt, not just for me, but for the very people who watch your show, the people who buy music, the people who find joy in a song. You're not just attacking me, Denise. You're attacking every single person who has ever found a moment of happiness or comfort in a song I've sung. You're dismissing their feelings, their memories, and their experiences as worthless because they don't align with your narrow view of what is relevant." Nadia Sawalha could not contain herself any longer. She turned her chair to face the main camera directly, breaking the fourth wall. "I want to say to everyone watching at home that this does not represent the values of this show or this panel. Sir Cliff Richard is a gentleman, an icon, and a national treasure, and he deserves to be treated with nothing but the utmost respect." "Nadia, you are completely out of line," Denise hissed, but her authority was gone, evaporated under the studio lights. "No," said Linda Robson, her voice thick with emotion, as she also turned to the camera. "Nadia is absolutely right. This has been disgraceful, and I am personally ashamed to be associated with it today." Cliff looked at the three women who had come to his defense, his expression softening with gratitude. "Thank you, ladies. Your kindness in this very unpleasant situation means more than you know. But I think it's abundantly clear that I am no longer welcome here." With that, he began to unclip his microphone from his jacket. The simple, deliberate act sent a jolt through the studio. The audience was on the edge of their seats, utterly captivated, sensing they were witnessing an unprecedented moment of live television. "Running away?" Denise called out, a final pathetic taunt. "I thought you were supposed to be tougher than this, Cliff." Cliff paused, the microphone in his hand. He looked at Denise not with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness. "Tougher than this?" he repeated slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of the moment. "Denise, I have survived 5 decades in an industry that can be notoriously brutal. I have weathered vicious personal attacks from the press, professional setbacks, and a level of public scrutiny that would break most people. But through it all, I have never confused cruelty with strength, and I have never, ever mistaken bullying for toughness." The studio was so quiet, you could hear the soft whirring of the cameras. Every single person in that room knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Cliff Richard, the consummate professional, the man who had never lost his temper on camera, was delivering a masterclass in dignity under fire. "Real toughness," Cliff continued, his voice gaining strength and clarity with each word, "is treating people with respect, even when you disagree with them. Real strength is having the grace to lift others up, not the desperate need to tear them down. What you have done here today isn't tough, Denise. It's just sad." Denise's face went white, then flushed a deep crimson. The audience's silent judgment was suffocating. "Don't you dare lecture me about strength," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't know anything about me or what I've been through." "You're right," Cliff replied quietly, his voice gentle. "I don't know your struggles, just as you clearly have no concept of mine. But I would never dream of using my own pain as an excuse to inflict pain on others. And that, Denise, is the fundamental difference between us." The cameras captured every emotion that flickered across Denise's face. Anger, embarrassment, humiliation, and for a fleeting second, something that looked terrifyingly like shame. The other panelists watched in stunned silence as their colleague's mask of abrasive confidence was stripped away, leaving her exposed and alone. Kay Adams stepped forward, towards Cliff. "Sir Cliff, please, I implore you, don't let this awful experience taint your view of our show or our network. This is not who we are." "I know it isn't, Kay," Cliff said kindly, his natural grace shining through even in this moment of crisis. "You 3 have shown me nothing but class and decency today. It is perfectly clear that this behavior does not represent the values you hold dear." Linda Robson was openly crying now, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I'm so sorry, Sir Cliff. You deserved so much better than this." "We all do." A low rumble of agreement and support for Cliff rippled through the audience. Someone shouted, "We love you, Cliff," from the back of the studio, and it was met with a smattering of applause. Denise, seeing the last vestiges of control slipping away, made one final catastrophic attempt to wound him. "Well, at least when I'm forgotten, it'll be because I stood for something real," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Not because I spent my entire career singing lightweight, disposable pop songs that meant nothing to anyone." The words landed in the studio like a grenade. The audience reaction was immediate and explosive. People weren't just gasping anymore. They were shouting their disapproval. Several audience members stood up, pointing accusingly at Denise. One woman's cry of "How dare you!" was so loud that it echoed through the silent studio. But it was Cliff's reaction that truly sealed her fate. Instead of anger or hurt, his face showed something far more powerful, profound disappointment mixed with genuine pity. He shook his head slowly. "Denise," he said softly, his voice somehow cutting through the rising chaos, "I genuinely feel sorry for you. To live with that much bitterness inside you, that much of a desperate need to tear down others to feel big, it must be an exhausting way to go through life." The utter simplicity of his response, the complete absence of retaliation, seemed to deflate Denise entirely. She looked around the studio as if seeing it for the first time, the hostile faces in the audience, the disgusted expressions of her colleagues, and the unblinking red lights of the cameras that had captured every second of her professional self-destruction. Nadia Sawalha stood up and walked over to Cliff, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Sir Cliff, would you please accept my personal apology and the apology of everyone here who believes in treating our guests with dignity and respect?" "Of course I do, Nadia," he said warmly. "Your kindness throughout this has been a bright spot in a very dark half-hour." The audience erupted in applause for Nadia's gesture. The sound was deafening, a clear and unambiguous statement of where their sympathies lay. Denise sat alone at the presenter's desk, isolated by the wall of sound. A pariah on her own show, Cliff looked one last time around the studio, his eyes sweeping over the faces of the audience members. many of whom were still clapping and cheering for him. He raised his hand in a gentle, appreciative wave, and the applause grew even louder. "To everyone watching at home," he said, speaking directly to the main camera, his voice resonating with authority and grace. "Please remember that kindness costs nothing, but its value is immeasurable. Don't let anyone ever convince you that cruelty is a sign of strength or that tearing others down is a way to build yourself up. We can, and we must, do so much better than that." With those final words, he turned and walked with quiet purpose towards the set's exit. As he did, the entire audience rose to their feet, giving him a spontaneous standing ovation that shook the studio to its foundations. The three remaining panelists also stood and joined in the applause, their faces a mixture of admiration for Cliff and utter shame for what their colleague had done. As Cliff reached the edge of the set, he paused and looked back one last time, not at Denise, but at the audience who had so vocally supported him through the ordeal. He placed his hand over his heart in a simple gesture of gratitude that brought tears to the eyes of many in the room. Denise sat frozen at the desk, watching as the man she had tried to humiliate and destroy walked away with his dignity not just intact, but magnified. The camera lingered on her face for a few seconds too long, capturing the precise moment the reality of her actions began to sink in. She had gambled on being the tough, fearless interviewer who finally exposed a faded star. Instead, she had only exposed herself as a bully, revealing everything that was toxic and wrong with a certain brand of modern media. The studio fell into a deeply awkward silence as Cliff disappeared from view. The remaining panelists looked at each other, then at Denise, then back at the audience. No one seemed to know what to do or say next. Finally, Kay Adams, her voice still trembling slightly, spoke into the deafening quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a commercial break. When we return, we'll be discussing the importance of treating each other, both in public and in private, with respect and dignity." As the camera's red lights went out and the show's theme music jarringly kicked in, the studio audience continued to buzz with shocked conversation. In those final moments before the feed was cut, the cameras caught one last image that would be replayed on news segments and social media for days to come. Denise Welch, sitting utterly alone at the long desk, her head finally sinking into her hands, while the empty chair where Sir Cliff Richard had sat stood as a silent, powerful monument to grace under pressure and the quiet triumph of decency in the face of cruelty. The man who had walked into the studio as a beloved entertainer had walked out as something far more, a symbol of the enduring truth that real strength is not found in the volume of your attacks, but in the quiet resilience of your character. The moment the floor manager yelled, "And we are clear!" signaling the start of the commercial break, the carefully constructed facade of television professionalism shattered. The thunderous standing ovation for Sir Cliff was replaced by a cacophony of frantic, overlapping voices. A senior producer with a headset clamped to his ear ran onto the set, his face pale with panic. "What in God's name was that, Denise?" he hissed, his voice a low, furious tremor. Denise Welch, who had been sitting frozen, finally jolted into motion. Her face, a mask of feigned bravado, twisted into defensive anger. "What was what?" "I was doing my job. I was asking the questions no one else has the guts to ask." "That wasn't a job. That was a character assassination, live on air." Linda Robson, her face streaked with tears of anger and frustration, stood up and jabbed a finger in Denise's direction. "He was our guest, a legend, and you treated him like he was something you'd scraped off your shoe. How could you be so utterly cruel?" "Oh, don't you start, Linda, with your bleeding heart." Denise shot back, her voice shrill. "You're happy to sit there and ask about his favorite color and his gardening tips. This show is called Loose Women, not Tea and Scones with Yesterday's Heroes." Nadia Sawalha stepped between them, her hands up in a placating gesture, though her own eyes were filled with fury. "Denise, you've destroyed the reputation of this show in 10 minutes. Do you have any idea what you've just done? The phone lines are probably melting. The press will have a field day with this." "Good. Let them," Denise retorted, grabbing her mug of water with a shaking hand. "Maybe it'll get people talking about something real for a change instead of the usual fluff we churn out." Kay Adams, who had remained silent and composed, finally spoke, her voice cutting through the argument with icy authority. "That's enough, all of you. Arguing like this helps no one. David," she said, turning to the frantic producer, "what's the plan? We're live again in 2 minutes." The producer, David, looked like a man drowning. He was listening intently to his earpiece, his eyes wide. "The network head is on the line. He's incandescent. Social media has exploded. To see Stand With Cliff is the #1 trend worldwide. Sack Denise Welch is #2. He looked at Denise with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "They're calling it the most unprofessional interview in British television history." Denise paled slightly at that, the first real crack in her defiant armor. "They're just his rabid fans. No, Denise, Kay said calmly. It's everyone. My own daughter just texted me asking if I'm okay and saying she was disgusted. You didn't just insult him. You insulted basic decency. Right, David the producer said, making a decision. Denise, you're done for the day. Go to your dressing room, now. You can't be serious. Denise shrieked. You're taking me off my own show? You left me no choice. He yelled back, his professionalism finally snapping. The network wants you suspended pending a full review. Now please just go before you do any more damage. We have 90 seconds of commercials left. Meanwhile, in a quiet corridor, far from the on-set chaos, Sir Cliff Richard was being guided towards the exit by his publicist, a formidable woman named Eleanor. Her face was a thundercloud. I'm so sorry, Cliff, she was saying. The pre-interview notes were clear. A friendly chat career retrospective. I never in a million years thought she would launch a premeditated attack like that. Cliff, looking weary but composed, patted her arm. It's not your fault, Eleanor. You can't account for someone's decision to be deliberately malicious. I'm just disappointed. It was all so unnecessary. As they rounded a corner, they were intercepted by a tall man in an expensive suit, his face etched with anxiety. Sir Cliff! Sir Cliff, please, a moment of your time. I'm Marcus Thorne, head of daytime programming for ITV. Eleanor stepped in front of Cliff. I'm afraid Sir Cliff has no further comment and we are leaving. Please, Marcus begged, his eyes fixed on Cliff. I just want to offer my profound, unreserved apology on behalf of the entire network. What happened in there was an absolute disgrace. It was unprofessional, unacceptable, and it never should have happened. We are taking immediate action, I assure you. Cliff looked at the man, a flicker of his earlier pity for Denise, now directed at this executive scrambling to contain the fallout. Your apology is appreciated, Mr. Thorne. Your other presenters, Ms. Adams, Ms. Sawalha, and Ms. Robson, were nothing but gracious. They are a credit to your network. He paused, his gaze clear and direct. What one of your employees chooses to do is a matter for you to deal with. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tour to prepare for. My fans are waiting. He gave a slight nod, a gesture of finality, and continued down the corridor, leaving the head of programming standing helplessly in his wake. Back in the studio, the final seconds of the commercial break were ticking away. Denise had been escorted off the set, leaving a gaping hole at the center of the presenter's desk. Her abandoned mug and notes sat under the hot lights, an accusation in themselves. 10 seconds! The floor manager called out. Kay, Nadia, and Linda sat back in their chairs, composing their expressions. They looked shaken but resolute. David, the producer, spoke into Kay's earpiece. Kay, you're taking the lead. Straight to camera. Formal apology. Don't mention Denise by name. We'll handle the official statement later. Then pivot to the next segment. Good luck, miss. 5, 4, 3, the camera's red light blinked on. Kay Adams looked directly into the lens, her expression somber and sincere. The empty chair beside her was starkly visible in the wide shot. Welcome back to Loose Women, she began, her voice steady and clear. Before we continue with today's show, we wish to address the events of the preceding segment. What you saw earlier was not in the spirit of this program, nor does it reflect the values of ITV or the dedicated team who work on this show every day. She took a breath, the entire nation seemingly holding it with her. The interview with our guest, Sir Cliff Richard, fell far short of the professional standards we strive for. We are all about open and honest discussion here, but that must always be rooted in respect. Today, that line was crossed. Nadia and Linda nodded in solemn agreement beside her. We have the deepest admiration and respect for Sir Cliff Richard, for his incredible 60-year career, and for his tireless charitable work, which has helped so many. We want to offer our sincerest and most profound apologies to him, and to you, our viewers at home, who rightfully expect and deserve better from us. We are truly sorry. The studio was deathly quiet. Kay's apology was delivered with such gravitas that it felt like a national address. We will be conducting a full internal review into this matter, she concluded. But for now, we have a show to finish. She managed a small, strained smile, shuffling her papers. Coming up next, we're joined by a chef who's going to show us how to make the perfect hearty autumn stew. But first, let's talk about the rising cost of... The transition was jarring, a surreal lurch from high drama to mundane daytime fare. But it was also a masterclass in live television recovery. The three women, despite their personal shock and anger, pulled together to steer the ship away from the iceberg, but the damage was done. In dressing rooms, production offices, and living rooms across the country, everyone knew that what they had witnessed was more than just a car crash interview. It was a cultural moment. The clip was already viral, a 36-second snippet of Denise's charity attack, followed by Cliff's dignified response, looping endlessly on social media. News outlets were scrapping their front pages. Radio phone-ins were lighting up. In her silent dressing room, Denise Welch stared at her phone, watching the tsunami of public opinion crash over her. Her Twitter mentions were a torrent of pure vitriol. Her agent was calling, her husband was calling, the network's legal team was calling. She had wanted to create a moment, to be the tough journalist who wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. But in her desperate attempt to tear down an icon, she had only succeeded in tearing down herself. The empty chair on set wasn't just a temporary absence. It was a symbol of a career that had, in the space of a single catastrophic interview, been irrevocably broken. The aftermath of the broadcast was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. Before the end credits of Loose Women had even finished rolling, the digital world was a bonfire of outrage. The clip of the confrontation, recorded on thousands of phones pointed at television screens, was the single most shared piece of media on the planet. By the time the evening news broadcast began, it was the lead story, eclipsing politics and global events. The narrative was simple, brutal, and universally agreed upon. Sir Cliff Richard, the epitome of dignity; Denise Welch, the face of media cruelty. The next morning, the nation awoke to headlines that screamed from every newsstand. The tabloids were in a frenzy. "Loose cannon!" roared The Sun, featuring a furious-looking Denise next to a serene Sir Cliff. The Daily Mail dedicated its first 5 pages to the scandal, under the banner "The 36 Seconds of Shame That Rocked Britain," complete with a minute-by-minute breakdown of the interview and glowing character references for Sir Cliff from a host of other celebrities. Even the more stoic broadsheets covered the story. The Guardian ran a widely shared opinion piece titled "Cruelty as Content. Has Daytime TV Finally Eaten Itself?" On rival networks, the morning shows feasted on the carcass of ITV's blunder. On Good Morning Britain, a notoriously outspoken host paced the studio floor, jabbing his finger at the camera. "This isn't about journalism," he thundered. "This is about a C-list celebrity trying to make a name for herself by tearing down an A-list legend." She didn't lay a glove on him. He walked out of there 10 feet taller, and she was left a smouldering wreck in her chair. ATV has a serious problem on its hands. Radio phone-ins were unanimous. Call after call came in from pensioners, young mothers, builders, and office workers, all expressing their love for Cliff and their disgust at Denise's behavior. He hadn't just been defended. He had been culturally re-canonized overnight. For Denise Welch, the storm was breaking directly over her head. She had been bundled out of a side exit of the ITV studios the previous afternoon, shielded from a small but growing pack of paparazzi by a nervous security guard. She'd spent the night with her phone turned off, but the silence was more terrifying than the noise. At 9 a.m. sharp, she and her long-suffering agent, a man named Michael, were summoned to an emergency meeting at ITV's corporate headquarters. The boardroom was on the top floor, a sterile glass box with a panoramic view of a grey London skyline. The atmosphere inside was glacial. Marcus Thorne, the head of daytime programming, sat at the head of a long, polished table. He was flanked by a woman from the legal department and the network's head of public relations. They didn't offer coffee. "Thank you for coming in, Denise," Marcus began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I'll get straight to the point. As of 8 a.m. this morning, ITV has received over 25,000 official complaints regarding yesterday's broadcast. Ofcom has been inundated to the point where they've had to put a statement out. 3 of the show's primary sponsors have invoked clauses in their contracts to suspend their advertising pending a review of your conduct." Denise, who had planned to come in fighting, felt her bravado crumble. "Marcus, it was a heated moment. The PR woman interrupted, her voice sharp. "Denise, you accused a beloved public figure of using his work with dying children as a publicity stunt. This wasn't a heated moment. It was a professional suicide note, and you signed it live on air in front of 2 million people. I was just trying to be edgy, to create a debate." Denise pleaded, looking at her agent Michael for support, but he just stared at the table, his face grim. "You didn't create a debate. You created a national incident," Marcus said flatly. "You breached at least 4 key clauses of your contract, bringing the network into disrepute, failing in your duty of care to a guest, unprofessional conduct, and insubordination to your producer's on-set direction. The legal grounds are, I'm told, rock solid." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is the termination of your contract, effective immediately. We will pay out the notice period, provided you sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. There will be no further comment from our end, other than to confirm you are no longer with the program." The finality of it hit her. Tears of rage and self-pity welled in her eyes. "So that's it? After all these years, you're just throwing me to the wolves?" "You walked into the wolves' den and covered yourself in steak sauce, Denise," Marcus replied, his patience gone. There's nothing we can do. You did this. Miles away, in the tranquil quiet of his Berkshire home, Sir Cliff Richard was walking through his garden, phone to his ear. He was talking to Eleanor, his publicist. The tour promoter just called, Eleanor was saying. Ticket sales have gone through the roof since yesterday. They've sold an extra 10,000 tickets across the tour overnight. Every single morning show wants you, every paper. The BBC is talking about a primetime special. You've never been more popular. Good heavens, Cliff murmured, pruning a rosebush. All for just standing up. It wasn't just that you stood up, Cliff. It was how you did it, Eleanor said. You didn't shout. You didn't insult her back. You took every ounce of poison she threw at you and responded with grace. People are starved for that, she paused. We need to release a statement. What do you want to say? Cliff was silent for a moment, watching a robin land on a nearby fence. I don't want to mention her, he said finally. I don't want her to lose her job over this. Cliff, Eleanor said gently. She already has. It was on the Sky News ticker 10 minutes ago. He sighed, a long, weary sound. That's a shame. Truly, no one deserves that. He thought for another moment. All right, let's write something. Let's thank the public for their incredible support. Let's say that I was disappointed by the interview, but that the kindness of the other panelists and the audience meant the world to me. And then, let's say we consider the matter closed, and that my focus is now entirely on the tour. No gloating, no anger. Let's just move on. Back at the Loose Women production office, the atmosphere was funereal. The remaining 3 panelists sat with the producer David and the writing team around a table littered with coffee cups. So, the chair is just going to be empty? Linda asked, her voice quiet. For today, yes, David confirmed. The network feels it's better to acknowledge her absence by not trying to immediately fill it. It's a visual apology of sorts. We have a guest presenter booked from tomorrow. And what do we say? Nadia asked. We can't just ignore it. Kay will read a short approved statement at the top of the show, David said, sliding a piece of paper towards her. It confirms Denise has left the program and wishes her well for the future. That's it? Then we move on to the first topic. Wishes her well? Linda scoffed under her breath, but Kay shot her a look. We have to be professional, Linda, Kay said, her voice firm. What happened yesterday was a disaster, but we have a duty to the 100+ people who work on this show, and to our viewers, to carry on. We do the job. We don't gossip, we don't gloat. We just do the job. An hour later, as television screens across Britain lit up with the familiar Loose Women theme tune, Sir Cliff Richard's official statement was released to the press. It was concise, dignified, and utterly classy. It thanked everyone for their support, gently expressed his disappointment, praised the other presenters, and then elegantly pivoted back to his music. It was the final word on the subject from the man at the center of it all. By refusing to engage in the drama, he had transcended it. The statement was a masterstroke of public relations, but more than that, it was a genuine reflection of the man himself. It was the final quiet act of a victory that had been won not with a raised voice, but with an unwavering sense of decency. The firestorm would rage on for days, but for him, the matter was closed. He had a tour to prepare for. His fans were waiting. This feels like a natural place to end the story, with the consequences delivered and the characters set on their new paths. Here is a conclusion to the saga. The story of what happened on that Tuesday afternoon at the ITV studios became a piece of modern media folklore. It was dissected in think pieces, used as a case study in university media courses, and served as a cautionary tale whispered in green rooms across the country. It was no longer just an interview. It was a cultural touchstone, a moment that starkly defined the line between provocative television and outright bullying. Months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Sir Cliff Richard stood in the wings of a sold-out Royal Albert Hall. The roar of the 5,000-strong crowd was a physical force, a wave of pure affection that had followed him around the country for the entire tour. Every single date had sold out. Venues had added extra nights. His latest greatest hits compilation, released to capitalize on his resurgence, had gone straight to #1, his first chart-topping album in nearly 2 decades. He adjusted the microphone, the familiar weight a comfort in his hand. He wasn't a younger man, but on stage under the lights, with that ocean of adoration before him, he felt timeless. The incident on Loose Women was a distant memory, a strange and unpleasant blip that had, paradoxically, become the greatest promotional event of his later career. His publicist, Eleanor, had joked that they should send Denise Welch a thank-you card. Cliff, of course, had simply shaken his head, finding no joy in anyone else's professional ruin. Denise Welch did not return to mainstream television. The brand damage was deemed too severe. After a period of public silence, she re-emerged in the more gladiatorial arenas of the internet. hosting a controversial podcast where her brand of brutal honesty found a smaller, more aggressive audience. She was forever tied to the incident, the clip of her sneering face, an inescapable digital ghost. In every new interview she gave, she was asked about it. She never apologized. Instead, she painted herself as a victim of cancel culture, a martyr who dared to speak an uncomfortable truth. But the defiance rang hollow. She had gambled for relevance and lost everything. Loose Women continued, its empty chair eventually filled by a new, carefully vetted presenter. The show's tone shifted, becoming noticeably kinder, more cautious. The remaining panelists, Kay, Nadia, and Linda, were praised for their handling of the crisis, but the event left a permanent scar on the program. They had survived, but they were forever chastened, a living reminder of how quickly a show's reputation could be immolated on the altar of manufactured controversy. On stage at the Albert Hall, Glyph launched into The Young Ones. The crowd rose to its feet as one, a sea of smiling faces singing along to a song that was older than many of their children. He looked out at them, at the people who had stood by him for 60 years, the people whose memories and experiences Denise Welch had so casually dismissed. He had faced the nastiness of the modern age, a culture that often prizes cruelty over kindness, and he had not bent to it. He hadn't fought fire with fire. He had simply been himself, a man of quiet dignity and unwavering grace, and in doing so he had proven that some things, kindness, respect, and a truly great pop song, never go out of style. The applause that night was more than just appreciation for the music. It was a thank you. It was the final resounding verdict, a roar of approval for a man who had walked through the fire and emerged not just unscathed, but shining brighter than ever before.